This episode is brought to you by Bulletproof Script Coverage, where screenwriters go to get their scripts read by top Hollywood professionals. Learn more at covermyscreenplay.com. You talk about the 3 levels of the dark side. What are the 3 levels?
This was so interesting when it was pointed out to me. I was taking a series of courses at the Philosophical Research Society here in Los Angeles and studying comparative mysticism. My specialty is mythology. And the physics of metaphysics and esoteric anatomy and all kinds of stuff, calling from different spiritual systems from ancient Hindu, ancient Egyptian, etc. And the teacher pointed out that there were 3 levels of the dark side. And the first level is personal. That's your own internal shadow, as Jung would say. So it's your phobias, it's your fears, it's your inabilities or your disabilities. It's one of my favorite examples of that and how the story arcs around this personal dark side is with Indiana Jones. And in the first part of the first film, we find out he's terrified of snakes. I hate snakes. And then towards the culmination of that film, he has had to rise above that personal phobia and jump down into the well of souls. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? Right? Or you give somebody, a fear of heights and then they have to climb the oil drill tower to save the day. The personal side is called in those old mystery traditions the dweller on the threshold, because it's what stands between you and your next step, between you and where you want to be, who you want to become, what's holding you back. And we can all probably come up with, there's procrastination or rebelliousness or laziness or I'd really just rather party than work.
Exactly.
No. And so the dweller on the threshold is what your character needs to be dealing with in addition to the exterior things. So that's your first level, is the dweller on the threshold, the personal foibles. The second level is impersonal, and that's the dark forces. That's nature red in tooth and claw. That's hurricanes. That's floods. That's earthquakes. I just watched Armageddon. What a fun action film.
It's so much fun. It's it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's an absolute ridiculous premise. And I have to take a side note. I was listening to the audio commentary years ago where Ben Affleck asked Michael Bay in the commentary, he's like, or he goes, Michael, let me ask you a question. Wouldn't it be easier to teach astronauts how to be drillers as opposed to be drillers to be astronauts? And he said, shut the F up, Ben, and just keep acting.
Oh, that's good.
But for everyone listening who's a Criterion Collections fan, Armageddon is in the Criterion Collection. So there's something to be said about that.
Yeah. And that is an example of your characters going up against level 2, the dark forces. Mm-hmm. You can't reason with an asteroid.
Right.
You can't bring it over to your side. What are you going to do with an earthquake?
Or the bear and Revenant. Like there's no talking to the bear.
No, there's no. So it's that old saying that in nature there's neither right nor wrong, there are just consequences.
Yeah.
Now, and we're seeing a lot of in our climate catastrophes around the globe these days, we are seeing some of the dark forces, but we're also seeing the contribution of our actions, the consequences of the contribution of our actions to that. So, yeah. So dealing with the dark forces. And if you have a story like Armageddon, let's say, where the main thing is the dark force, it's the asteroid destroying the cities, it's going to destroy the whole planet. And then within that, you have the personal story, the father-daughter story, the love story, the friendship and collaboration, and NASA versus the government, etc. But it's against that big dark force second level. And even with a story that's all about something personal, if you put something bigger behind it, it can have more impact. So even if somebody's dealing with I think, yes, it was well received, but was a Silver something playbook?
The Silver Lining Playbook.
Silver Linings Playbook, yeah. I would like to have seen there be just a bit more going on in the background of, some ruling that was coming down or something that was going to take away the funding from the kind of treatment that people were getting, something a little bigger so we have, once again, a bit of balance. The third level of the dark side is what used to be called the Dark Brotherhood. Now, we're trying to be gender neutral, so we're calling it the Dark Otherhood. And that's your Darth Vaders. It's your governments. It's your marauding armies. Oh, and certainly in the dark forces, you put pandemics and disease. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. You can't reason with the bug. But the Dark Otherhood can also be a very powerful villain, like a Lucifer, like a Thanos, but something that's a little bit bigger than an ordinary person.
Right. So, I understand what you're saying. So it's not like Hannibal Lecter is a human being still, but in the grand scope of Thanos it's also a different kind of story. Thanos wouldn't work in Silence of the Lambs, though that would be an interesting film.
Try that mashup. Oh my goodness.
That would be an interesting. But you're right. These are larger different kinds of stories, especially in science fiction. You get a lot of that. And especially like in Star Wars or in sci-fi and things like that, these villains that are so much more than just a villain.
Yeah, and Spartacus is that kind of story too.
Yep.
So those kinds of combinations, then you want to have at least, you always, I think, want to have an individual protagonist. So then you've got their dwellers on the threshold, their foibles, and then are you putting them up against a Dark Otherhood character or group, and or against a dark force? And then you got a story. But I think we always have that dweller part too.
Now, have you had the pleasure of watching the biggest show on Netflix right now, Cobra Kai?
I love it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, I was watching it when it was still on YouTube, and because I was a fan of the Karate Kid, I was like, oh, let's take a watch on it. And everything on paper, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that great of a idea. Like, okay, we're going to see Johnny Lawrence, and his life is over, and the Karate Kid has a car dealership. Mr. Miyagi's not even there. It doesn't seem like it's going to work. But what the writers and the creators of the show did so absolutely brilliantly, and they're continuing to do it even through the third season, is that they keep shifting the goalposts, which is something I rarely see. Like there's anti-heroes, and we'll talk about what an anti-hero is in a minute, but literally, like at the beginning, you're like, well, Joey Lawrence is the bad guy, and Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid, is Danny LaRusso is the good guy, because that's the way it was in the movie. But then as the season goes on, Danny LaRusso turns to he's kind of the bad guy, and Joey Lawrence,
dark side,
right? And he's going to the dark side. And then also with their students is the same thing. They start off, and they flip as well, and they keep doing this, and then throughout the series, it's up and down. So one moment Joey Lawrence is the bad guy, then he's the good guy, then he's the bad guy, then he's like he's both, and then same thing happens with Lewis. So now like at the end of season 3, we just know that I'm not going to spoil it for anyone listening, but they're just like they are what they are. It's like it's not a clear line. It's so blurred. It takes, I mean, and please correct me wrong, it takes an insane amount of skill as a storyteller and as a writer to do what they've done in karate, in Cobra Kai, because it is arguably one of the cheaper shows to shoot. It's not Stranger Things. It's not, Games of Thrones, but yet it's got numbers that are insanely bigger than those shows on Netflix. And it's all because of the story, but specifically that back and forth that is so rare to see. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I think you put it very well. It's that shifting of the balance when each of those main characters begins to transform against and because of the influence of the other. And so there's this continual awakening, and then, oh my gosh, I didn't think I was like that anymore, but I fell into it. And then you've got that, also I like that generational split where you've got the young kids and you see how, talk about the dark leadership again. You see how the kids, particularly those who were bullied, who were fearful, and then you give them a tool to strike out at and strike back against those who had been oppressing them. It's classical sociopolitics psychology.
Yeah, wasn't there I think it was in Berkeley that very famous experiment, the prison experiment, where they put just 2 groups of people, one of them got guards outfits and one of them were prisoners, and it was just an experiment, and it went haywire. Like they had to stop it because the guards starting to because they felt the power. It was so. Is that right? Do you know more about that experiment?
Yes, actually, I attended a lecture by Dr. Zimbardo at one point, and you can find a lot about his work on the web. It's the Zimbardo Experiment, and there were a few others that followed that, but he's got a couple of books out. And one of the most recent, in the last 15 years, was he came out with one after the torture scandal from the Iraq War.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And had a really good book and was giving talks about that. How easily we are seduced into the dark side by power.
Yes.
And think about this too, though. You wouldn't be seduced by power if you already had it. So when you have a system that's got a stratified populace, you've got a built-in revolution waiting to happen.
Because there's always people who don't have that power, don't have the resources to fight back, and in many ways, especially here in the United States, and I'm sure around the world as well, that we're getting beaten down by so many different powers, whether it's government, whether it's medical bills, whether it's food that's not healthy for you, whether it's if the credit card companies, the banks getting you charged, there's a constant beating up of the little guy. And yet that's why this story with GameStop is so kind of fascinating, that the little guy's like, oh yeah, well, now we've got some power. And now they're abusing it. But watch, if you watch that experiment now they're like, they're going to do it to Bed Bath & Beyond next, the stock. They're going to do it to AMC, because those are 2 stocks that are dying. And they're even talking about doing it to Blockbuster.
I didn't know Blockbuster was still even alive.
It's the company, exactly. They was like, you know what? It's so fascinating to see what happens. And even in Revolution, when the masses overtake a government or take over, then it just starts, the cycle starts again. Then they put someone new in power. That person gets addicted to power. And then it's like, oh, I really want to help. But rarely is there some Jesus Christ, Buddha-like, Gandhi-like figure that takes the power and actually, tries to help, and for a long, long period of time. It does happen, but it's rare. It's usually whoever gets that power gets gets addicted to it, and they turn into villains. Which is that's what's the brilliance of Cobra Kai. That is and the power is karate. Is karate like Hawk? Perfect example. That character Hawk, who has a cleft lip and he was a beaten up and he was just the complete, like he was as nerdy and as weakling as you can. Then he turns into. Sorry if you haven't seen season 1, I can't help you. There's going to be a slight spoiler here. He turns into one of the baddest, most kind of bad guys in the show. It's so fascinating to see that kind of like shift. And you were saying something really interesting about Danny and Danny LaRusso and Joey Lawrence, is that they change because of each other's interaction with each other. If you left Daniel LaRusso alone, he would have just stayed being a car dealer dude. And if you've let Joey Lawrence, he'd still be wallowing and drinking his beer and, watching his heavy metal music videos from the 80s, and he'd be fine. But when you put them together, they react to each other almost as a chemical reaction. And it is a yin and a yang. But the yin and the yang are constantly shifting. And it's so fascinating to watch.
That's a very good point. And
you're writing notes? Thank you.
Yeah, about that. There's a thing, it's certainly I didn't think it up, but I think it's really great. And that is, what we need is not revolution or devolution. We need evolution. Because what you just pointed out there, revolution, think about the term revolve. It's like you're a pig on a spit. One side's done. If you make a revolution, you're just cooking the other side, then the other side's done. That one's done. And it just keeps revolving. Hence, the counter-reformation, the counter-revolutions that you find in so many systems. And I think you see that in Cobra Kai. But what they're starting to do is to evolve up.
They are. You're absolutely right, because they can't keep that
brilliant.
That gimmick. You can't keep up. And then they had to create an even badder guy, which I won't say for anyone listening. They even created a bigger, badder guy, where now the yin and the yang have to figure some stuff out.
Yeah.
It's so brilliant. One of my good friends works on the show. He's one of their editors. And he can't tell me anything because he's signed away his life. But like the moment season 3 popped out, I was just like, dude, he's like, I know, man, I know. It's fascinating to watch that. To watch the rest of this interview, head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.